Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood, and joining me is Ultiworld junior editor, Miles James Raynor. Wow, Keith, look at this face.
Yeah,
amazing.
Are you hosting the show for us, buddy? Are you gonna do some content? You have some thoughts on the action this weekend?
He's gonna break it all down.
He's gonna give us the full analysis.
X's and O's expert.
Look, if you've ever needed a reason to go to the YouTube, if you're just a listener and you're like, oh, I've always wondered if the YouTube content is good. Like this, you can't get this anywhere else. You can't get video of the baby.
YouTube exclusive.
Yeah, for real. We almost put this in subscriber bonus, but he's got almost like a little mullet back here.
Yeah, I see that going on. It's like the low back of the head hair.
Yeah, he's had that since birth, so I don't know what's going to happen to that.
How old now?
We're getting close to 4 months.
Great. Is personality developing yet?
A little bit. He's like, starting to laugh at things. He likes to kick. He likes to kick me and mommy a lot. That's a lot of fun for him. So I don't know if every baby's like that, but that's his early personality traits, I guess.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the cameo here, Miles. We appreciate you stopping by.
Say bye to the people, Miles.
When we come back, we're going to talk about the AUDL Championship Weekend. We'll be right back. All right. Well, great to see and hear from Miles here on Deep Look. And Keith, I hope you're settling in wonderfully into your new role. Has it? Do you feel like fatherhood has changed you? People often say that.
A little bit, but mostly it's been about surviving through the first month or two. I feel like it will more. I feel like my wife seems like it's changed a little bit of how she looks at the world, but. I don't know if it's from coaching or thinking about being a father, but some of that stuff maybe felt like it's already there. We'll see as it goes, but it's certainly been an experience. We're very, very fortunate. Miles has been had great temperament. He sleeps well, so I definitely feel like I'm counting my blessings.
Awesome. Well, the AUDL Championship Weekend took place in Washington, D.C. Friday and Saturday, and the Raleigh Flyers defeat the New York Empire 19-16 in the final. That's after the Empire rolled through San Diego in the semis. They win 22-18, and Raleigh edges out the Chicago Union in overtime 21-20 in the other semifinal. And so Raleigh, who's been, just snake bitten for so many years in the postseason, finally gets back to championship weekend, and more than that, plays one of the best games you'll see all year, certainly from an offensive standpoint, in the final against New York. They had 7 total turnovers as a team. Their offense only got broken one time. It was a clinical performance, an incredibly high-level game. And Keith, your thoughts on Raleigh winning this championship, their first.
Long sought after. You almost want to ask them, do you feel different? Do you feel like it's changed you? Because they've been waiting for this for a long time and fighting for it. And you can hear that when you talk to the players, when you listen to their post-game interviews. They are steeped in the culture and the community and the history of Ultimate and Raleigh. And sure, when it originated, it wasn't setting out to win semi-professional titles, but now they finally got one and did it with just a masterful performance. This is a wonderful game to watch. I think that this will be a kind of not landmark game because it's tough to ascribe it that kind of value in the greater cultural history of Ultimate, but I do think it's going to be a game that people can go back and look at and say this is an exceptional display of how Ultimate can be played.
Well, just so amazing to watch the intricate defenses and the clinical offenses. We saw a lot of different offensive looks. And, it's crazy because the game started and it felt like Raleigh was going to just collapse. I mean, they get broken on the first point of the game. And it's amazing to look back on that and say that was the only time they got broken in the game. And it was just on an errant swing pass from Alan Laviolette. And, the New York Empire are a really good team. And Jack Williams, I think arguably was the best player in the game. But the team dynamic and the depth that Raleigh showed, the skill defensively to mix things up, and the offensive line where they got contributions from really everybody on the line. And, at times past, it's felt like Raleigh really has to have its star players show up and have a big game, right? Kind of the way that the New York Empire felt this season, where it's like they needed to have Jack Williams and Oscar and Yacht have big games in order for their offense to be successful. I mean, we saw points where those three almost touched the disc exclusively at times. And for Raleigh, it's felt like that in the past, but this year, I mean, how great was Terrence Mitchell? He's been a nice cutter for a while, and it's like, oh, like a good athletic downfield cutter who can score deep goals. But like Mitchell was coming under, facilitating the offense, throwing assists, and like maybe he was their best cutter. I mean, I don't feel like you said that in the past, right? We always talk about Henry Fisher. We talk about Jacob Fairfax, and like those guys were really good too. Fairfax had a great game. And then obviously their handlers were, they wouldn't give up the disc. I mean, New York just could not take the disc from them. Sol Yanuck, Matthew Johannes, just incredibly impressive. And Laviolette, despite the one, sort of bad turnover on the first point, was rock solid the rest of the way.
That was his only turn. He gets a goal and 3 assists. He, I believe, second on the team in throwing yardage, just third, because Matt Johannes actually big lead with 300 yards, but Laviolette just slightly behind Sol Yanuck, who maybe got a little bit more downfield than you're used to from Sol. But yeah, it was the type of performance that you'd expect from Raleigh when they're playing well. Deep, various contributors. You talked about Terrence Mitchell. Think about this stat line. So he has 204 yards receiving. That's not weird for Mitchell. It's not a ton for one of their best receivers, but it's an example of how his value maybe isn't shown just by the yards that he picked up. So he gets 0 goals and 2 assists, but with 2 assists he has 5 yards throwing, or 10 yards throwing, 5 yards per assist. That's a pretty odd stat line for a player, but he really stood out. I thought Jacob Fairfax was probably their top performer among all their players. Came up with some huge plays, obviously led on the stat sheet with 5 goals. But I thought Fairfax really had a tremendous game. But it was a team effort, which is exactly what you expect from Raleigh. D1, getting their D1 line out, their D2 line out, getting reps for all of those players and getting contributions from those players all the way down the roster and helping quiet some of these Empire stars who, I feel like Oscar had like one of the quietest 4-goal, 5-assist games you can have. It doesn't feel to me like he had that kind of impact on the game with 500 total yards, but he was the leader of the offense ultimately for the Empire. But he and Yacht and Williams just weren't able to take over the game like we've seen them do when the Empire are getting W's.
And Raleigh only got 5 blocks, recorded stat sheet blocks, but that doesn't tell the story of the defense that they played. Many of the turnovers that they caused were simply because New York literally had no options and threw it to nobody. They were about to get stalled out, stall 6.5. And that level of coverage, both in the reset space and downfield, the bailout wasn't there. There was no Ben Yacht coming under to save them. There was no John Lithio deep cut to save them. The reset handlers weren't getting open. And I mean, to be clear, I mean, there were a couple really nice blocks. Alex Davis got a really nice block. Tim McAllister had a layout D. Sol Yanuck made a great play in the end zone that I think saved what would have been a break. Now I can't, because with the timeouts you forget.
No, I remember the one. It was kind of like a twisting.
Yeah, it was like a throw over his head in the end zone, and
it saved him.
He did a great job to contort and just try to hit the disc away instead of trying to catch it.
And I thought McAllister's block was I thought that was the highlight of the game. I thought that was an incredibly impressive block, and he had just come straight from his honeymoon to play in this game, and shows up. He only played like 9 points or 10 points or something like that. Goes out there and gets an incredible block.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge. Layout D on a short field against Jack Williams, who had talked to the press conference about McAllister maybe matching up on him, but he didn't think he was there. But it turned out he was there, and then he gets that block.
Oh, he was there.
Incredible. I mean, this is just an up and down the roster performance. I think everybody on. Let me check right now. Everyone on their 20-man roster played at least 7 points. And let's see for New York. They had 5 players that played 5 or fewer points. And that's the difference. Raleigh was a deeper team. Their handler defense was better than New York's. And their offensive handling was better than New York's. And I think that's really where the game hinged. And I think you got to give a lot of credit to the coaching staff too. I think Mike DeNardis had a great postseason. And remember how many questions there were about this Raleigh team coming into the year? Like they come out of the gate and they did not look very good. I remember early in the season, I think Anders Unix in one of his first games, maybe his very first game in the AUDL, had like 3 turnovers and like some bad ones, like, swing pass off the line, turf. And I remember I asked Mike, I saw him in an early game. I was broadcasting and I said, what are you feeling about Anders Unix? He's this young player, new to the league, has kind of a bad game. And Mike was like, not worried at all. Like he does a ton for offense. I think he's one of our most effective offensive players. And yeah, I was a little skeptical, but how do you not look at the way that this game played out and the way that this season played out and not think that that's exactly right? He had 3 assists, he had 4 goals, and that undersells how important he was to the O-line. I mean, he just was a killer in the red zone.
It's a capstone to a great season for Youngst, who deserves to be on some award podium somewhere. I mean, this has changed my outlook on his projection as a
100%.
He really looked the part of someone who could be. I mean, I don't think he'll be the best player or even necessarily the top 3 players on like a club championship team, but he's going to be one of the best players on any O-line that he steps on. Like he's going to be able to contribute on any elite club or semi-pro offense. He's just so quick. He's a great decision maker. Really impressed. And I don't think I knew that he could be this dynamic. He always felt like one of those solid guys who just isn't going to make a lot of mistakes, but he really showed an aggressiveness as a cutter that really pushes his game into the next level.
It's such a crazy game. I mean, there were only 12 total hucks in the game. And there were so many possessions where it just there was incredible amounts of tension. And it's not like New York didn't play good defense. New York played really good defense for much of the game. And Raleigh was just refused to give away the disc. And what a turnaround from Raleigh's start against DC at the beginning of the playoffs, where they, the O-line was just chucking it away, a bunch of terrible deep turnovers, and they're down 8-4, and then they basically went from that moment and never looked back. And to be clear, I mean, I think they got a harder game from Chicago than they did from New York. I think they probably played a better overall. I mean, I think they definitely played a better overall game against New York, but I mean, they had to come back late against Chicago, and that game could have easily gone the other way.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if Pavel Giannis doesn't,
I mean, they barely escaped.
Yeah. I mean, if Pavel Giannis doesn't miss that pass, that just simple, to the outside short under flick, that game might have gone Chicago's way. But
Are you sure you don't mean Ross Barker? The forehand turf out of the end zone?
No, that was the second turnover. That was the following.
Okay, I didn't want to. That's a pretty big one.
I'm not slandering.
If it wasn't it, but I'm with you.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, it's hard to tell whose fault it was. Giannis threw a pass, and the cutter coming under got bumped off his line, and so I think maybe miscommunication. Maybe you could have called a foul. There's like a lot of ways you could look at that one, but it was too wide. And then the very next point, beautiful pull from Taylor that sticks the Union deep in their own end zone, and then Barker throws the turf. And then that was like the deciding go-ahead break, and Raleigh went on to win in overtime.
A really, really tough loss for the Union. I mean, you could see it in the body language. Not getting through that game that they had every chance to win was difficult. I don't know. I'm curious if you had to pick, like, who do you think was the second best team this year, Chicago or New York?
I was just thinking about that. I think that New York would have beaten Chicago.
I'm in the same spot.
I think it was close. I think you can't just look at the scores. I think Raleigh played. Their offense was not as good in the Union game as it was against New York. And I think if Raleigh played like they did against New York in the Chicago game, they probably win that game by 3 or 4 points, not the one that they eventually won by. But it's hard to say. I mean, I think Chicago's defense would have presented trouble to New York as well, but I do think that New York was. I mean, I think they were a really good team that happened to run into a buzzsaw.
Well, I know I had a lot of fun watching the finals. You were there, so I'm curious to get more of your impressions about what it was like on the ground, and what you think championship weekend, what the future holds for it, what it means for the AUDL. So I think we may get the chance to talk about that in our subscribers only segment. So stay tuned for that if you're one of our subscribers.
Yep. That sounds great. I want to get to a couple other notes on this, AUDL championship here. First of all, before we kind of look to the future, what do you think cost New York in this final?
To me, it was a lot. They did play a pretty good defensive game. Like, I think that's one of the things that stood out so much about this game is that the offenses played well against good defense. It wasn't like the defenses were just flopping around out there. But I think that it was the things that we've talked about New York, a lack of depth when needed to be called upon. I don't know if Ellie Chartok was hurt, but he did not play a lot in this game. I don't think that Ben Katz had a particularly good game, although he was solid outside of the dropped pull. But I don't think he had like any standout moments that maybe really could have helped the rest of this team. Saul Roishmeyer-Bailey was one of the players who really was put in a bigger position there. But, I think that lack of depth hurt them. And then I think that we just saw a defense that wasn't able to take the disc off of a good offense. And that's been the problem that we've pegged for them since the beginning of the year. I mean, they end up with 4 blocks for a team that has Jeff Babbitt, who got 2 of those blocks, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And 2 Dross brothers, like, to not be able to get blocks is strange to me. So, you have to feel like that's part of the places where you lay the blame.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, like, they only had 11 turnovers. That is not bad. That's probably below their season average.
Oh, I bet it is.
They played a good game. They just got outplayed by a better team. It's that simple. And, Jack Williams had 3 turns, but at least 2 of those were coverage sacks where he didn't have anybody to throw to. I actually thought he had a really good game overall. Maybe not his absolute best, but, I think overall he played better than Ryan Osgar, and Ben Yat was kind of relatively quiet compared to what we're used to seeing from him. And I think ultimately there were some big moments in that game. I forget if it was Mike or Ryan. I think it was Mike Drost had a chance to get a D on a floaty pass in the end zone. And Eric Taylor just went up and 2-hand jammed it over him. And, that's the kind of play that, you got to come up with in that spot. And like we're used to seeing the Drost brothers get that D like every time. And just a couple missed opportunities and a couple bounces went Raleigh's way. You can't really fault them for conversion rate. They only had 2 chances to break. So they got one of them. I mean, they could not take the disc off that Raleigh offense.
Was it the actual defense who got the break, or did they sub in the offense?
Oh, I think it was the D, because it was that first point. I think they just
you're right.
jammed
You're
it
right.
in because they were 5 yards from the end zone.
Yeah, that does sound right, actually, now that you mention it.
So here's the question that everybody's thinking. What does this mean for Raleigh going forward? And let's start with the short term. What does this mean for Ring of Fire? Because remember, Ring of Fire is mostly this Flyers team, and they're adding Jack Williams, Ryan Osgar, and Jonathan Nethercutt. I mean, unquestionably, they are going to have one of the best rosters at Club Nationals. I think they're clearly a semifinals team. The question is, are they a finals team? Are they a championship team?
That is a big question, especially when you think about what we've seen from the West Coast out in Seattle. But I was high on Raleigh in the AUDL. They're my championship pick to begin the year. It's time to bring it up. I got to bring it up, Charlie.
You pick New York.
No, I did pick New York. Remember, I said
you're hedging your bets.
Set it up. I can't lose. But I did pick Raleigh to begin the year, which is the harder pick because I had a lot less information at the time. So I did pick Raleigh, and I'm if I'm not mistaken, I picked them to reach the semifinals when we did our early club season picks. So I'm high on what this Raleigh team could be. It'll be a little interesting watching them kind of figure out how to be both the really deep team and have the star power. Having high volume players like Oscar and Jack Williams and John Nethercutt, like these are not guys who blend in, right? They don't do the role player thing, and maybe they can, maybe they can do what Rowan did and take a back seat or whatnot. But or maybe that just makes you a juggernaut when you can turn to these players in your times of need, but otherwise don't have to put too much load on them. I mean, maybe that is going to unlock them in a way we've never even seen before. So I know I would be scared of this team. I can't put them over Sockeye right now because of what we've seen from Sockeye thus far, but I don't see any reason why they can't be the second best team.
The problem for Ring is a simple one. It's that they don't have a lot of time to get unified. What are their lineups going to look like? I mean, how do you not want to basically take the O-line from this Flyers team and make it your O-line for the Ring season? I mean, you can't realistically put like Sol Yanuck on the D-line again this year, can you? I know he's a great defender, but he just was like one of the best center handlers in the AUDL for the last 4 months and led the team to a championship. So what are you going to do? Like, are you going to put him on D where he's going to get way fewer possessions, way fewer touches? And I mean, who do you want to then put on your O-line? I feel like you need to take what you had with Flyers and then figure out where other parts go. And it's hard because who you're moving off, like where are you putting Jack Williams? I think you can put him on D, but it's the same thing. It's like
he's another player who you don't want to his touches.
That you want to have the maximum number of touches to him that you can get, but you also don't want to mess up the chemistry that you have with your existing O-line. And where do you put Ryan Osgar? I mean, Ryan Osgar feels like a O guy, like he's not a D guy. So
there are also two other players who I think make a huge difference who are on this Ring roster.
They're not on the Flyers
roster. And that's Liam Strolls-Bose and Dylan Lanier. So those are guys who are going to be in big. Like I don't know who you're going to have to take some of these O-line guys.
I think Liam's got to go to.
There's
D.
just no way.
I think Liam's got to go to D because remember last year, what was the deciding turnover? Or not last year, 2 years ago. What was the deciding turnover in the Sockeye Ring semifinal that was basically dead even and finished on double game point? Do you remember?
I don't. Go ahead.
You do remember. It was Trent Dillon getting a block on Jack Williams in the end zone on a throw that came from Liam Strolls-Bose. And
But it was an incredible
it was an incredible block, but it's a throw that shouldn't have gone up. It's a throw that you don't need in that spot. And I think Liam's a great player.
You're talking about it like a 20-year-old, a 19-year-old Liam Strolls-Bose. Now fair. He's 21, 22. It's Totally did.
I agree,
different.
but
I mean, look at what we saw from Anders.
I do agree. I do agree. And I mean, LSB has been one of the most exciting prospects like in Ultiworld's history. So I understand, but how do you have all these players who all seem like they're a great fit on O? I think Liam goes to D. I think we see, and we're going to have Sol Yanuck on in just a second to ask him about the whole championship weekend and their win. And we're obviously going to ask him about some of these personnel decisions for their lineups. I mean, they're going to be super stacked, and you got to think this gives them confidence. I have no idea what they're going to do. Like Nethercutt and Liam, like their D line after the turnover. Oh, wow. It's going to be like an O line out there.
Oh yeah. Oh, they're not going to need an AUDL timeout to get an O-line out there. They're going to have, Alan Laviolette and potentially like Sol Yanuck and Gooch, and maybe they move Fairfax's back on defense. Like, I mean, they're going to have a D line. Do you think that was a little bit of a salve for Osgard and Jack Williams? Osgard's like, damn, I can't believe we lost that game, and just Saul comes over and says, hey, I'll see you out there this club season. Like, this team that we're about to join is a legit title.
Pony out here petitioning USAU. Please let us make roster changes. Jack, please. It's been a.
I think they've made their decision. They are not. I don't know if they would change if they could. I don't think they would.
Maybe you're right. If I was Pony, I'd sure like to see some reinforcements coming through the door right now.
Yeah, I bet. Jeff
Babbitt on the Phantom roster. Philadelphia Phantom roster. There's been some interesting stuff. We'll talk a little club sectionals in a little bit. Final thoughts on AUDL champs, Keith.
It was an exciting weekend. The Chicago game, it really could have gone the other way. It was a tough pill to swallow. You get this incredible final. The New York Empire San Diego game, a bit disappointing, but you can't win them all. Like, we've been doing this long enough to know you never know what you're going to get out of a game. Sometimes the games that look incredible on paper just don't pan out. We ended up getting what felt like the three best teams in really impressive matchups. So not a lot more you can ask for it. I'm looking forward even to going back and watching this game. It was that good.
Sol Yanuck joins us next. We'll be right back. Joining us for the first time on Deep Look is Raleigh Flyers and Ring of Fire handler Sol Yanuck. Sol, congratulations on winning the AUDL Championship. How you feeling a couple days removed from it?
Thanks, Charlie. Feels good. I'm in med school right now and did zero homework over the last 72 hours. So all the post coverage and pictures and videos have been distracting me from an important task, but I did fine on my quiz, so feeling good about that. And just been fun to relive a bunch of different angles of all the festivities. In the moment you have all of your individual moments, but it's cool to see all of the sort of things that were happening around you at the time.
When you look back on let's say the weekend, really both games, what do you think was the pivotal moment for your championship run?
I mean, we liked joking about how, we won this game 10 years ago. We won this game 20 years ago. So, to some extent there is very much a cosmic element to the cause and effect of the weekend. If I were to pick a moment, I might highlight like Allen. Allen got us a couple of blocks back for the O-line against Chicago that were really, really clutch. One like really nice layout D on a break side under on Tim Schock. Although I'm not sure he touched it, but it was a huge play. Definitely those were big moments in the Chicago game. Just keeping us in the game in the later stages. That's what I would say.
Now, Sol, you were a key part of this Raleigh Flyers O-line, and you're coming off this final performance that certainly we at Ulti World have been praising, and the numbers reflect really well on. How do you feel like this stacks up in the games that you've played in? Is this one of the best offensive games you've been a part of?
Well, I haven't played a whole lot of offense in my career. So in terms of like my offensive impact on a game, it's way up there. I had a couple games in the bracket at College Nationals in 2017 that will forever be, top 5 games I've ever played. I think the thing that stands out about this weekend and this season is, I'm coming into my prime as a player, which, I definitely feel more confident and more in control than I have in previous seasons. But the difference is, I'm on a line that is 100% designed to set me up for success. And like, I just have so many weapons around me and such a great support system that, I have no choice but to play well, because I'm always presented with easy options. I'm always, cutting for guys who are happy to feed me the disc and really in the ways that I want. So yeah, definitely, like, I felt awesome. I felt really confident all weekend, basically. But that's 100% a product of the support system that was around me. I still had to throw the Frisbee at Jeff one too many times in the finals. But yeah, I'm happy to play well, happy to show up in a big moment, but it's not really a surprise. It's not really like a random thing. It's just you play well when you're put in a position to succeed.
This Raleigh team got off to a slow start this season and, had a lot of close games, clearly a competitive team, but also took a lot of losses along the way to good teams in the division. And then you're down, kind of big to DC, and it looks like this might be, the end of it for Raleigh yet again in the postseason. I guess this is sort of a two-part question. Like, how did you get better from week 1 to week 12? And was there a moment where it felt like things really clicked into place along that way?
Sure. So the first part of that question is sort of the bigger picture of the season. And I would say week 1 and week 2, week 1, our offense was dreadful. It was our first Frisbee game in over a year against a real team. It was pretty wet in Atlanta all day. Like, the Hustle had 4 drops on wide open unders that game. So, our deep throwers were off target with our deep throws. Defense was amazing and got a bunch of Ds and got us back in the game late in the game. And then, end of the game was sketchy. So week 1, it was relearning how to play Frisbee and the offense playing poorly. Week 2 was the offense finding their rhythm in better conditions and the defense having no answer for the DC handlers, because we were just still early in the season and we just hadn't integrated everybody into the same mindset of how we were going to approach a game like that. And, we did a lot of intentional work, Mike pounding the same principles and concepts into the D line and into the O line as well, pretty much the entire middle of the season. And you got to see our 2 games at the end of the season against DC when we were consistently applying those principles. I think we took them out of their game pretty successfully. So, again, like all of the games that we lost were very close games that we could have and should have won to some extent. But honestly, like some guys have been saying, we lost exactly the games we needed to lose to some extent this season. But we lost them in ways that felt like we still controlled our destiny 100%. So I think, the structure of our season set us up for success in terms of seeing what we needed to work on, having matchups in the middle of the season where we could like incubate and try new things without, being challenged on the scoreboard. And we played awesome in those games for almost all the time. And then we got to sharpen ourselves back up at the end of the season before playoffs. So, I think it was just a really successful season of seeing our weaknesses and shoring them up in practice intentionally. What was the second element of your question again?
Was there a moment that it felt like it clicked into place?
I think the DC game before, I think the last game of the regular season when we played DC. Well, actually, I think it's more like the Atlanta game. We played terribly in the first half against Atlanta, and then we started using some D pieces on O more consistently in the second half of that game. Offense started scoring really consistently, and that was the first game we had ET on D-line because we knew that we needed an answer for Draco, and he was lights out the whole game. So I think when we made those personnel adjustments in the Atlanta game, it showed us like that we were now utilizing all of our tools to the best of their ability. And so we came back and won that game, and then the offense played much cleaner for the entire game against DC at the end of the regular season. And so that DC loss at the end of the regular season, we saw, okay, if we play a consistent 4 quarters, then we're going to go far.
You mentioned that in some ways maybe you lost the games that you were meant to or needed to, but come on, you're telling me that overtime loss to New York, that doesn't burn you up a little bit still? I mean, maybe it's gone now that you got him back when it mattered, but
right.
Come on, that one's got to sting a little bit.
I mean, it stings. It was a weird game. It was a really weird game. There were probably 7 or 8 guys on our team who felt like they gave the game away. I had 2 fourth quarter turnovers, and they were ancient history by the time we got to the end of the game, right? So, that game was as useful a loss as we had all year because we realized we hadn't done nearly enough end of quarter work to plan for that kind of, onside pole tactics that we saw from New York. I don't take regular season losses that hard as long as I feel like the greater trajectory of the team is totally fine. Henry hates losing. Henry does not tolerate losing in any context. I am way more, see the big picture, and as long as things are under our control, I'm 100%, not 100%, I don't like losing. I prefer to win. And every time we win a big game in the regular season, I find myself saying, wow, winning is much better than losing. But I think after that game, I sort of understood how, stochastic is a word I like to use. We just sort of lived in a certain timeline of outcomes from that game. And I wasn't super worried about, wasn't super worried about the 1-point losses at any point during the season as much as it hurt during the moment. And again, like all of those games, we came away feeling like we had control over our own destiny, which was the most important thing.
Keith and I talked about this earlier in the show, but curious for your take. Who's the better team, Chicago or New York?
It's an interesting question. I'm honestly a pretty big fan of Chicago's O-line. I found that they were challenging to game plan for because they had so many hybrids and it was hard to find a point, like a weak point to leverage for turnovers. Whereas New York was a team with very clear roles, but also guys who were clearly there to stay out of the way. Just in terms of creating a defensive game plan, that's at least makes your job a little bit more straightforward. The only issue with Chicago is their D-line didn't play any offense. So, is that my... Oh. That should turn off in just a minute.
Smoke alarm life?
It's really, really sensitive. But if we put the fan on...
I don't think the takes were that fire yet. I mean, we're just getting started.
Yeah. Where shall I go from there?
Well, I'm kind of curious. This is a title that the Flyers have been working towards for a while. Have had struggles in the postseason, it's been a parallel with your experience in the USA Ultimate Club circuit as well, and that with Raleigh. What does it mean to you to kind of bust through for a title? And does it make you hungrier for the club title, or does it feel like, okay, it's nice to actually get here? What's the sense in comparison and relative to what's going on in the club scene?
Yeah, I think it's 100% like really nice and amazing to win, and almost, I don't know, like it's 100% like what we were going for and what I was hoping for, and all we could ask for is to, have this attitude and have this mental approach and have it pan out in the way in exactly the way that we said it was going to. And, more than anything, it's, I wanted to win it for the guys on the team. I think I think back on championship winning teams, and I think about the sort of the film of them winning the game and rushing the field, and all those moments that happen between teammates. Guys go to the person who meant the most to them or who they have been playing hardest for. You think about Ironside in 2016 or Sockeye last season, just like seeing moments between teammates shows how much winning a championship like that means to the guys that were involved. And so having moments like that was really important to me. I think I love the process of creating a team too much to, to really have that like win affect how I'm thinking about club season, I think, because the process of seeing a roster, constructing it into personnel groupings, imagining certain players playing together, you guys can imagine the process that I'm going through this week in anticipation of sectionals with Ring. I'm in a candy shop, basically, all of the, tools that we have at our disposal. So, I guess I would just say I'm a little too much of like a Frisbee purist or a Frisbee nerd to have it, change the way that I think about the game or think about the season. But, I don't know, maybe it takes a little bit of pressure off the team to, have everybody on the outside of the circle quiet. And we can let our play speak for itself, and we can let our consistent excellence speak for itself, without as much of the, whispers and questions.
Take us inside the candy store right now. Last time we saw Ring on the field, you and Matt Gushahanis were playing on the defensive line, but you've just come off this season where you guys played great on the offensive line, and you just beat a New York team with only giving up one break, and it was kind of like a weird, fluky first point of the game break, and then you only gave up one other turn the entire game, at least on an O point. So how do you build your roster for the club season now? Obviously, I'm sure you're going to be testing things out at sectionals and trying to figure that question out, but you have these pieces coming in, Osgar, Williams, Nethercutt, plus the crew, plus the guys who didn't play in the AUDL. How do you slot them all in? Where are you thinking? What are your ideal lines as of right now?
Sure. I mean, I can't divulge the whole thing,
Yes, you can. You can. You can tell us right
no
here.
One's gonna
Sure. Yeah, okay. We're giving out the keys again. Full Nethercutt ball. Let's see. So I think we feel amazing about having Eric on D. And I think there are some other guys who are going to be playing D because we have Jack and Ryan creating so much production on offense, that it allows us to have other guys play D. We've got some younger guys joining the team who haven't played for Ring before or played big minutes for Flyers. So like Ben Dameron's a kid from Paideia who goes to Carolina, who we are really, really excited about having. He and Matt McKnight are like two really, really young kids who have incredible talent, who we are really excited to cultivate. I I think I'm just talking to Matt after finals because we so much prefer to play D. I was just telling him that it was going to be pretty hard to take him off the O line and let him play D after he was completely unconscious all weekend and making no mistakes and always getting open for everybody. But that's still in consideration. We've got the handlers who can play in any situation, so I don't think we're going to box ourselves in at this point. We're just going to see which guys work best together. And we're going to have Dylan Lanier on our O-line again. And Dylan is the greatest fill cutter in the history of Ultimate. So everyone's going to enjoy playing with him.
This kind of transitions to a little bit to Carlton, because I want to get your take on this comparison. I know you're steeped in Carolina Ultimate history. Every time I hear you interviewed about, whether it's the Flyers or Ring, you're kind of reaching back into the history and talking about what's come before you. Now, Cut is also very deep in the history, right? Like, I know that their alumni are texting you. I know that there's a lot of connection there. Which community is more connected with its longevity, with its history? Do you feel like it's more in the Raleigh side, or would you say it's Carlton?
It's an interesting question. I think Cut is, more of an emotional connection. Like there's so many guys have the symbol on their bodies. And when we all get together for alumni weekend, there's a really deep connection between everybody, no matter whether given class of 98 alum or not, everybody is there and everybody's on the same page and sort of understands what the team means to everybody, which is a really special thing. And it's been pretty sad to not be able to get together in that way, because it really teaches the current team a lot about the program. Whereas I would say the North Carolina scene is way more tangible. It's more about shared experience, shared play style, shared understanding, literally on the field. And so it's special to be able to play off of people who you've never played with before, whether it's new guys coming up and automatically having chemistry with people on the team, or, watching now college teams that have nobody from my generation on them and being able to recognize sort of all of the different nuances that they're doing. So I'd say for Carlton, it's way more of a sort of emotional community connection, because Cut has changed their on-field product many times over the generations. Cut's also a longer history. But I would say since about 2013, 2014, it is more of a brand recognition in North Carolina that we put on the field.
Going back to AUDL Championship Weekend, who's the MVP for your team, would you say, this weekend?
MVP. It's tricky because, the strength of our offense is everyone feels their own little niche. So, I feel that the things I do are not that hard, based on the people that are around me. Durs would not want to go pick up in a Kirk Gibson, Tim Shock double team on the sideline, but I also wouldn't want Vaughn running behind me the entire game. So I guess that's why we each have our own strengths, right? So I think it's got to be Terrence, because Terrence really carried us in Chicago. Terrence made some plays against Chicago, and not even just, people always talk about, oh, Terrence Mitchell, that guy makes plays, right? When he jumped over two people against Colony, that was Terrence making a play. But this weekend was so much more about Terrence, the release valve, and Terrence, the team leader in completion percentage, right? Look it up. That's a thing. And, he's always going to, get his buckets in the end zone, but he was so solid. He was so positive. He was keeping us confident the entire time. And, when he's at his best, it's hard not to feel confident when you're on the line with him. So everyone brought their own flavor, and there are points where T just jogged down the field while Henry and Fairfax gobbled up 25 yards at a time. But I think Terrence was the one who showed up when we needed it the most, for sure.
It feels like the Club National Championships are still considered the highest level annual tournament in the world. How does the level of play that you saw at Championship Weekend and across the AUDL season compare to the highest levels of club? Do you think it's getting close? Do you think it might surpass it?
It's an interesting question. I think every year it gets a little bit closer. I think the smaller field just is a little bit more of a pressure cooker and just asks you to be a little bit better when playing club, whereas the big field just gives the offense a little bit too much wiggle room. It makes the great defenders even that much more important, and it makes the defenses that can play in a sort of unified fashion so much more successful on the big field because it's so clear. Like, defense has no room to make mistakes because the offense has so much room to punish any small mistake that gets made. So certainly the extra space shows the best defenses for what they are. But I think the depth of talent in the club division is bigger. I would say the good players are separated from the great players a little bit more clearly in the club division because the great players are able to consistently dominate even when there's less space, even when there's, just more clutter, and it requires a higher skill level and a higher field IQ to be consistently excellent. So I think guys are realizing how fun it is to play in the ADL because it is really fun, and it's, it sets you up for success more as an individual player than just shelling out all your money to play club. But I think certainly club is still there, and hopefully the pace of the game can get sped up a little bit because that's one thing I've really come to appreciate in AUDL is, as much as I hate having refs move the game along, and watching club after a season of pro is, a little bit of a grind. So I think there are rules that USAU can maybe take a look at that help with flow of the game, but maybe until there's a full generation of kids who have watched AUDL coming into their prime in their 20s, I would expect club to still be the 1A.
What surprised you this weekend, if anything?
What surprised me? My honest answer is the biggest surprise I had was I kind of expected San Diego to play better. I think they're a pretty good deep team with good horses on their D-line, and adding Nutt was, there was a Nethercutt sized hole on their team and he filled it. I think the wind really doomed them. There was really bad wind in that game. And I think playing in super windy conditions against New York is bad because they have giant people who play ultimate 10 feet above the ground in ways that nobody else can. So that was a surprise to me. I will give a secondary answer here, though. I think what surprised me is how locked in all of our young guys were. I think they were amazing. I think, Eblood and Seth are really phenomenal players and really phenomenal team guys that bring a lot of intensity. But, Trevor Lynch, Connor Russell, those guys were taking hard matchups and they were executing at a really high level with a high level of nuance. So I always know that Trevor has great footwork and he's a terrific individual defender, but I saw like young members of our team making heads up plays in the finals in ways that, I'm hoping to see from them, but that I didn't necessarily expect to see executed at such a consistent rate in such a big moment. It's easy for a young guy to just look at his guy and say, this is my job. I'm just going to guard John Lithia the entire point. But, we had guys half a step away from poach blocks on like half of New York's holds. And a lot of that was coming from young guys who are inexperienced in a stage that big. So I was just happy to see that, the young guys stayed sort of present and played so well as members of the unit throughout the entire weekend.
Makes me feel old to hear you calling people young guys now. I remember when you were young guys.
I've got to be above the median age on this team at this point.
It's wild. It's wild to hear.
Are you 26?
25. Yeah.
25.
Yeah, I'm sure Cortella still thinks you're a young guy.
Yeah.
You mentioned getting close on a couple of blocks, and there's one point in the game that stood out to me where Anders Youngst was close on a block, but it required a lot of contact on your college teammate Tim Schock in the semifinal game, and then there was going the other way. Jacob Fairfax takes a shot in the end zone, or Henry Fisher, takes a big shot in the end zone as well. Those kind of physical plays with the Anders situation, given that you were, you know both of these players involved very well. I mean, what was it like seeing that happen? And I know you kind of stepped in and separated the players. What did you say in that moment to keep everything from getting any worse?
Yeah, so I would say the person whose fault that is number one, it's my fault because I got beat up line. Number two, it's Kurt's fault for throwing a terrible throw into the back of the end zone. That's a throw that is never allowed at my YCC practices. And number three, Durs created a lot of contact. It was certainly not a good bid. In the moment, I thought it was like a much worse bid than it actually seems on film. Like Durs, I think, certainly has a play on that disc. He didn't do it in a way that avoided contact, which is his fault. Tim is always sensitive about contact because of, concussion history for him. So I knew that was going to be like a bad situation as soon as it happened. But Tim is fine as far as I can tell. In the moment, Tim yelled at him and then started to walk away, sort of like threw the disc down and started to walk away. And I just ran in there. And I think a bunch of people ran in there expecting a bad situation. And the fact that all of us got in there sort of created the conflict when I think Tim was prepared to just leave after watching it on film. I basically just went in and said, everybody walk away, just walk away. I think Tim was upset with me a little bit because in the moment I was not acknowledging the, dangerous play that my teammate had made. But honestly, for such a bad situation, I think it was resolved really quickly. And, Tim is super mature, to handle something essentially as well as anyone could expect one to handle that. I think he and Durs, sorted it out after the game. Durs apologized, and I think we're all good from there.
What did you think of the refereeing this season? I know you just said you're not a fan of refs in general, but given that you had them, what did you think of the job that they did?
I want to express a lot of gratitude for head Flyers ref Dan Wong for being very communicative, for being very direct, for telling us exactly what's going on and understanding when we want to give him feedback. I wish that we had more refs like Dan Wong.
He's one of the best in the league, no question.
Yeah. That's about as much as I want to say about refs.
Okay.
So you got half a week till sectionals. Yeah, you have to flip everything over. What's the rest of the week look like for you? Are you taking it easy? Are you recovering? Or is it, full steam ahead? We're trying to start peaking soon.
Well, the week is mostly homework for me. But no, I think, we had a meeting yesterday with the guys who wanted to participate in a planning meeting. We basically said, let's put together some personnel groupings for the weekend so that we can have, ease of calling lines. I don't think we're going to do a whole lot of, the O-line plays every one of the 3 O points we play in any given game or anything like that. But
every team just put that on the bulletin board. We're going to score 4 points on ring.
Hey, man, watch out for the Expendables. Expendables are going to be dangerous.
Anything could happen, Saul.
Josh Hartzog coming for my neck. No, but, this weekend's going to be just a lot of fun, right? It's going to be a phenomenally talented group of guys coming together. And we have a lot of guys returning to the team who were not on the team in 2019, with Nutt, with Terrence, with Fairfax, and then adding a lot of, adding Ryan, Ryan's the easiest guy to play with in the world, easiest guy to just talk to. He's just so nice. And we're all really excited to get him to be on the team just because he's so talented and such a straightforwardly positive guy. So I think it's just going to be a great weekend, and we're just going to try to squeeze as much out of it as we can. Ring has never taken themselves too seriously, and I think that streak will live through sectionals this weekend.
All right. Give us 3. I don't even care whether they're AUDL or club or whatever. I need 3 Frisbee hot takes from you right now. I know you got them in your mind. You've been very buttoned up here, so this is your chance to shoot from the hip.
Okay. 3 hot takes. Okay. Cold take number 1, Mac Hecht, best hammer in the world.
Best hammer in the world.
I like
best
it.
hammer.
It's a good
best
start.
Best hammer in decades. Unbelievable.
He did show it off at US Open.
Unbelievable combination of power and accuracy. He never ever messes it up. So that's take number 0, because I just wanted it to be on the record so that everybody realizes it.
We're getting a bonus take.
I'd like to see Chain in semis.
You think it's going to happen?
Maybe. I mean, before the pro season on the Flyers podcast, I said Atlanta was going to be really good, and then they turned out to be really good.
You mean nationals, not sectionals, right?
I mean, if they can get out of sectionals, then they'll be in national semifinals.
There you go.
I think they're good. I think Miranda's going to sort of learn from the Hustle downfall in a way. I think they have some pieces on Chain that they do not have on Hustle that make them better in ways. And the small field benefits all their huge guys in their zone. So as long as they don't get 4 PMF or TMFs per game for double teaming in their zone, I think that they could very much make a run for semifinals. I just love the way that Miranda uses her pieces. Right, Miranda takes players who often don't have roles on other teams and makes them incredibly, useful and incredibly effective in her sets. So she is phenomenal at that, and I think that is reflected by Chain and Hustle this season. So that's one thing. Can I say watch out for Phoenix? I don't know if that's that big of a take, but I don't think anybody wants to play Phoenix at nationals after what they did to teams with their skeleton crew at Pro Champs. So
I think it's kind of a hot take given, I think their stock's a little cool after all the injuries. So I think there's some heat on a watch out for Phoenix take.
They're reloading. They'll reload by nationals, I think. Certainly, you never want to lose Jesse Jones and Ann Worth. That's not part of the plan, but I don't know. Watching their film from Pro Champs, I didn't see a whole lot of teams finding consistent success against their O-line, and I think their D-line, with the pieces available to them, were remarkably effective against the best teams in the division, minus Fury, asterisk, times 100. But yeah, I think they look awesome. And, I think DA and Allen and the leadership of that team are putting them in a really strong position to succeed. So eyeball emoji. Let's see. Hot take number 3. I don't know. Maybe we see Sockeye Machine in quarterfinals. There's certainly going to be one. Take. They're going to be 1-2 at nationals. It's a classic like Dartmouth-Stanford
Someone drops a
situation.
game.
Right.
Yep.
Like one of them is very liable to lose a game in pool play. Sockeye should have lost a game in pool play last season, right? Like Dig was all over them. So I think obviously Sockeye has come out with the goods in bracket play of every tournament this year, but I don't think anyone thinks they're untouchable. Certainly our team doesn't think that they are untouchable, but yeah, I don't think that nationals will go according to plan for those two teams.
Going to be very interesting to see what happens.
I mean, Pony's going to be a landmine. They're going to be an absolute landmine in someone's pool. It's like a 3 seed.
7 or 8 seed.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
I don't know if they got the goods, Saul.
Well, I mean, they got D-line Ben Yacht coming back, man.
That's true.
So, I mean, I'm 100% confident in my team, but as an impartial observer, I think the seeding at nationals will be really interesting to see, and I think that we'll see a lot of like three-way ties at the tops of pools. Besides our pool, obviously. We plan on coming in third in our pool and then winning nationals.
Well, since you clearly watch a ton of tape and you're paying attention to everything that's going on, I want to ask you about Truck Stop. They make the finals of Pro Champs. They're right there with Sockeye, and then their O-line just coughs it up 5 times in a row. Are they legit? You think that they're a team that we could see make a run towards semis?
So full disclosure, I don't have ESPN3, or at least I didn't want to.
No, Saul.
I didn't go.
Saul.
It's okay. I avoided watching Joe throw the disc at the ground 6 times.
What matters is do you have an Ulti-World subscription? That's what people really care
right.
about.
So I watched their Rhino. Right. I watched their Rhino film. I watched their Revolver film. I think Truck is awesome against teams who can't match Daryl and his ability to sort of scheme. And even teams with good coaching, Daryl finds a way to poke at your weak points. So I think they're also like getting a lot out of guys who don't necessarily like jump off the roster as being like stars. Like Dylan Salzman's playing amazing for them. And like Jeff Wodach and Jacques Nissen, who are not, those guys are not Jimmy Mickle and Sam Little. But they're playing better than Jimmy Mickle and Sam Little this season. Well, no shade to Sam. Sam's great. Sam's always great. I don't know. I think that they do a good job of utilizing their pieces in a really good way. I don't really know if they have, the elite downfield defenders necessary to knock down teams with like big isolation cutters. I should really remember, I think they lost to Revolver at Pro Champs. And I think Revolver is like exactly the team that they're not that well set up to defend. Troy Holland can only guard one player at a time, unfortunately. But honestly, I think Truck is going to be the same general, status that they've been for the last few years. They're going to give everybody a hard time. Nobody is going to beat them easily. But if you find a solution for a couple of those pieces that are sort of discreetly holding everything together for them, then, it's possible to, put them in a really bad position. So like quarterfinals last season, we took them out of the rhythm in a sort of crosswindy game with a bunch of junk that put a lot of pressure on their backfield, and they did not throw over the top almost at all. And so we found that to be like a point of leverage for us in that game. We also hugged it deep to Henry Fisher like 4 times. So that was awesome. Yeah, I think Truck is a team with low amplitude, but sort of a sort of high floor.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us. I feel like we could talk to you about Frisbee for literal hours right now. Saul, congrats again, and have fun at sectionals this weekend.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. Cut rules.
Sol Yanuck of Carlton Cut, formerly Raleigh Flyers, Ring of Fire. See you soon, Sol.
Later, guys.
Welcome back to Deep Look. Great to talk with Sol, as always. Such an analytical mind for the game. You know, feels like, I don't know. It's like, is CP3 a good comparison, Keith?
I buy that. You know, he's got a little bit of attitude, but also is like a great leader, a great thinker about the game. And, you know, CP3 is like, what was the Players Union rep as well. So like, that's the kind of role that I also see Sol doing too. So great. I think it's a great comp. Not as old yet, but maybe young CP3.
Young CP3. It's an action-packed weekend. Obviously, we had the AUDL Championships, but we also had sectionals starting for about half of the sectionals across the country. And we also had the start of the Con10ent Tour, which debuted in Philadelphia, one of 3 stops for this all-black Ultimate Tour. It was an exciting universe point game between the 2 teams that was comprised of kind of like a fly-in all-star groups with local players, which I think is a really cool way to kind of involve the community in a way that we haven't seen other past tours really do as much. Lights Out versus Dark Matters, and a game ended, but then the crowd wanted more. They did win by 2. So I don't really know if if the result even really matters, to be perfectly honest. But Keith, your thoughts on this game and kind of like what this means.
It was an exciting finish. The rest of the game, had some big plays, but one team was in pretty firm control. But then a big comeback at the end. So it was exciting, and then you get the extra double game point, and Khalif had an extra couple of points. They went from, I think it was 15-14, and then they ended up playing the game to 17. Khalif had a huge layout block in those closing couple points when it was tied 15-15, I think. So that was pretty exciting. Really some competitive play. People were really into it, which was also exciting to see. And as someone who, I've talked about my experience commentating and being a part of one of the Color of Ultimate games in Atlanta. It still has a power over me. It's still really inspiring to watch these players play, and energizing for me as well. They had a couple issues with the start of the stream, but like we know all about that. So we're not going to hold anybody for too harsh when you're trying to stream from some field, some park. It's not exactly like the easiest place to get all your technology set up, but the excitement level, it's great to see big name players, but also get a chance to kind of meet these new players from local communities that you haven't before. So like, you get Amel Awadul-Kareem, who's like a well-established player, or Trent Dillon taking over a point, and then they throw a huck to a player you've never heard of before. I think that the game-winning score was Devin Asamada throwing to Lauren Woods. If you're from the communities that those players are from, you might know them pretty well, but otherwise you might not. So it was cool to get to see these other players step up, especially in maybe communities that I don't think people know the players in the Philly community that well, or some of these players might have traveled in from like New York and whatnot. So I'm curious how that'll play out as they travel across the country, continuing the tour. They have 2 more stops, but a fun game. Some really interesting highlights and approach. I appreciate the fact that I say this about the Premier Ultimate League with some of their exercises, but like this, they've decided like we're going to do this our way and do things differently. I don't know if the teams are going to stay the same, but they had unusual team names. There was a lot of energy at the field. The marketing for the game has been a little unusual too. So it's interesting to see that they have taken such a different approach, and that it feels like it works well for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, you've got Color of Ultimate, which sort of like laid the foundation for something like this. And I think that we've seen that this is just very energizing to communities. And I've seen folks from Philly who were able to be at the game talk about what a great experience it was and how much fun it was. And it was cool to see all the people packed in along the sidelines. And, obviously the outcome of the game and the makeup of the teams is, it's fairly irrelevant. It's about, watching great players play and players who maybe don't get as much spotlight for a variety of reasons. And I mean, so I guess, Keith, how does this feel? You've been involved with some of the Color of Ultimate stuff. I actually was filming out at the LA Throwback Color of Ultimate event last winter, just before COVID. And, I was at the AUDL Championship, so I couldn't be at the Con10ent stop in Philly. But how do you feel like those two things compare? Like, is it even like worth comparing them? Is this just sort of like a continuation of the same idea? Obviously, Color of Ultimate is about like not just Black players, but also Asian players and Hispanic players. This is an all-Black tour. That's an obvious difference. Beyond that, is there, what do you see as differences here based on what you've seen?
I do feel like it is a continuation, that it's kind of laid the groundwork, and it's a showcase for these players who maybe don't get that same spotlight, and for those who do, it's a chance to play as a part of this group and feel as a part of a community where you belong and not feel othered in the same way that you might in other environments. So I think that it really benefits those players and can be really inspiring for players of color, or in this case, Black players who are watching. I am curious to see how this impacts beyond that, because, while Black players being energized and excited is really important to helping change the experience for Black players in Ultimate, the predominant spaces are still dominated by white players and white leaders. And so, how are they interacting with this is something that I'm not unclear about. I don't really know how folks are going to see this. Will it be, a sweet showcase game? I think people felt the same way about Color of Ultimate. And like, will that impact how people behave, how people think about how to integrate this Black community into an Ultimate community that has not always felt like a safe, friendly space for them? I think hearing those stories, which has been a part of this Con10ent Tour, hearing the stories of and experiences of players is eye-opening for folks who maybe don't share that experience, who aren't familiar with that. So that, I feel like, is a great agent for change. Certainly, this past 2 years and whatnot, when racial equity has been at a forefront of the national conversation, hopefully has done some of that work too. But this is an exciting event, and I'll be curious to see what the impact is, even though it's not like we're going to be able to measure it, unless we've taken a survey and somebody's got the survey data keyed up or whatnot for before and after. I think it's going to be hard to tell, but I can say that there's going to be a lot of value for this experience for those involved and those who are close to it.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool, the community aspect, not only like involving local players on the teams, but also like doing clinics and things in the communities as a part of the thing. It's not just like a show up and watch us play and then we're on to the next city. It's like trying to make the community stronger. And I'm sure it's exciting for some of the local players to meet famous players from around the country who are like flying and driving in
and play with
the
them.
events. Right. And playing with them, of course. So, I don't know if you can necessarily like measure that stuff in a quantitative way, but I do think that, that's the kind of thing that makes people feel really positive about an experience playing Ultimate. It makes them want to be more involved. Maybe it helps them say, hey, I want to do more organizing of community events and like youth clinics and things like that. And that's the stuff that's super important. So anyway, the Con10ent Tour continues. They have 2 more stops next month in San Francisco and then early November in Seattle. So keep an eye out for more information about those. And very cool to see that. And I'm glad that they were able. There was a bunch of online chatter about the sectional schedule not lining up very well for people to be able to go to the Con10ent Tour, which started in the kind of late afternoon on Saturday. And so hopefully scheduling wise things can get better to make that a little easier in the future. Obviously, sectionals weekend is just tough in general. Let's talk about some sectionals, Keith. I don't really know if there's any. I mean, yes, there were upsets. I don't know how much they mean. I have a hard time feeling like they really mean a lot anytime we're talking about sectionals. So some big ones right off the top. Austin Waterloo beats Dallas Public Enemy. Interesting. I feel like I need to take a look at that Waterloo roster right now. Rebel beat Bent. Rebel out of the upstate New York area, and of course Bent out of New York. That was a surprise, but Bent was missing a lot of players, including some who were competing at the Con10ent Tour event.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What are some other ones, Keith?
How does that even work? I've been wondering that. Rebel. So Rebel is actually in a different section, but they didn't have sectionals because I don't know if there was another team at all in their section. So like, do they get to be the sectional champs of a section they're not in? It's weird.
I guess they do.
But I do think, you certainly raises a few questions. I don't think that Bent has been exactly the firebrand team that we had anticipated early in the year. But again, how much can you take away from these results, especially for some of these teams? Like we talked about even during Pro Championships, this is like their second tournament. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So hard to say exactly what it means for them. What were some other big results? You had
a couple
Sub-Zero.
Yep, that was the one I was just going to say. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you had Madison Madmen beating Sub-Zero in Northwest Plains. So does that strike any concern about Sub-Zero? I don't even know if like Kevin Pendant-Scantley was playing with Madmen, given that we heard that he is joining Machine this year.
Yeah, I don't. Like I said, I have a hard time feeling like it's super meaningful because I know that people are, there's just elite players on good teams that know they're going to qualify for regionals don't necessarily feel a need to go to sectionals. It's just that simple. So, I think Sub-Zero is going to have to take that game more seriously, but they were shorthanded. And I think that's what you're going to see most of the time when you see surprise upsets. CLX beat Kansas City United. That one actually feels like maybe it could have some implications at regionals. Because it's not like Kansas City United has been a top 10 team. And we know that CLX is a long history of being very good.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that one. What else? Not a lot of other notable upsets.
No, you had some ranked teams competing against each other, get a sense of, where they might stand. But I don't think there were a lot of other upsets. We're still getting results coming in, I think, as they get posted.
I think the bigger thing is like, what are we seeing from players making those final roster decisions? Because of course, there were no rules this season. You could play for anybody at any time.
No rules.
Until you hit the specific, roster deadline. And I'm going to give a shout out to Isaac Saul, who's clearly like scrubbed through at least what's going on in the men's division. And some stuff that we already knew, like Andrew Roney and Bobby Lay joining up with Atlanta Chain Lightning. Nice pickups for them. We talked about the ring pickups earlier. Those were basically known at this point. I mentioned earlier Jeff Babbitt joining Phantom. Matt Stevens also playing with them. How about this, Keith? I didn't know about this one. Conrad Schloer rejoining Pony.
So I did know about this because I happened to look at the Pony roster, but I just assumed that he didn't leave. So I guess I didn't pick up on the fact that it was a change.
Well, he was one of their best defenders in their 2018 championship season. So I think it's a pretty helpful for them to pick him back up. That's just going to make everybody's matchup a little bit better. Temper picking up a few folks. Kevin Quinlan, Brandon Mattis from the Minneapolis area, Nasser Mbe Vogel, who is getting some D2 minutes for the New York Empire this season. And Temper kind of had nice results. I actually think they're kind of a sneaky team. Like, could they be a quarters team? Is that crazy?
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but I don't think it's crazy. I mean, it's a weird year, Charlie.
Something that got hinted at a bunch over the course of the last couple of weeks in interviews and things, both at the Pro Championships and at some of the AUDL playoff games. Rowan McDonnell is going to be playing with Truck. So he had earlier decided that he wasn't going to play club this season, but I think he's kind of practice playing with Truck, and then I think they convinced him to play. So a nice pickup for them, and Truck made the finals at the Pro Championships.
I'll be very curious where he goes because of the way that he played during this AUDL season. This kind of like more reserved role player role. Like, is he going to carry that over to Truck, or are we going to see the takeover player that we're so used to? And which of those is better for Truck? I don't even know. But it was one of the things that we said about Truck, like who is the best player in this team and who is the takeover guy. So like, are they missing that guy with Rowan? I don't know.
Maybe. I think Rowan tried to be that guy for the Breeze in their game against Raleigh, and I don't know that it really worked out that well. He had a bunch of big turnovers down the stretch.
Yes, he did.
So, the other big thing about sectionals that's been going on. Have you seen some of this, Keith? A lot of complaints about the cost.
I have seen a little bit of this on Twitter.
So there was some expensive sectionals, $700-800. Particularly like in California where fields are pretty expensive. There were some women's sectionals that ended up only being 1 day, but they were paying the same price as men's and mixed teams that were playing 2 days. I feel like I've already said this 1,000 times on Deep Look. I just think people need to get used to the fact that it's going to cost more to play tournaments if we want to have a sustainable sport.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes sectionals. Now, that doesn't mean that you should pay $1,000 for sectionals and only get cones and a park. I think in my mind, sectionals just across the board and regionals needs to be treated like championship level events. And that means lined fields, regularly refilled water, bathrooms, tents, and a bid fee that is appropriate for all of that. I think if it's me running a tournament, I'm probably not going to charge the same amount of money to a teams playing a 1-day event as a 2-day event for obvious reasons. But I also think that, teams and players complaining about paying $40 per person instead of $20 per person for their sectionals experience is a ridiculous complaint that doesn't need to be taken seriously.
There's actually a thread from Jamie Mercado about the kind of other perspective, like the organizer's perspective here, that I saw on Twitter. That's at All Clear Tape. So you can check it out for yourself if you want. But basically laying out, something that we've talked about a lot during the off-season time, which is, the volunteer dependence that exists in Ultimate. And if we move away from that, guess what? It's going to cost money. So, I do encourage people to think about what the money is doing rather than just how much money it costs them. If it's going into local organizations and how it can help them. And it's a fair question to ask. If you don't know the answer to that and you want to know, hey, not only what am I paying for? I think that's totally a reasonable question to ask. And what is the organization that's getting all this money doing with it? Those are totally reasonable questions, which are different questions than why the hell does this cost me so much? So I do think it's fair to want to know the answers to those questions. And I don't, I know that it would change how I look at things to see my sectionals, costs triple or whatever. I would be curious about that, but organizations are probably strapped for cash and volunteers right now. They're getting it from both sides.
But also we don't have to just be charitable in thinking about it. Like people just need to be willing to pay $50 to $100 per person for a tournament weekend. It's just that simple. How much does it cost to do other sporting events? Much more. It's probably $75 to run a 5K in New York City. A 5K. It takes like 25 minutes. All the running people are going to be like, no, it doesn't. I don't know what the actual times are. And so like when people complain about the price, it's just because you're anchored to the wrong thing. You're anchored to the prices you paid 10 years ago or what you paid in college or whatever. We have to move away from that because it's killing our ability to like retain tournament directors. Now, again, this said, if tournament directors are going to charge what I would consider to be sort of like market price bid fees, $1,000 to $1,500 a team or something like that, then they need to provide amenities. And I just think sectionals should, and regionals and nationals should be amenity-filled tournaments. I know sectionals is tough because they're often trying to find people to do it kind of last minute, but you know, put on a good tournament.
What amenities do you feel like are important to you? Like for me,
sectionals
at any tournament, like I don't need necessarily well-stocked, incredible food table or, you know, gear and jersey tents. The number one thing to me is field quality. Now that costs money. So if that's where the money's going to go, like if you're like, well, we can get these nicer fields or we can get these other things, give me the nicer field every time. Give me the nicer, better location for a field. Give me the better schedule. Give me some security. Like those are things that I'm looking for. And I think that, you know, obviously it's hard to get those even if you have money, but those are things worth paying for. And
fields are expensive. Absolutely. Fields are really expensive. I don't think people realize how expensive fields are. Like ultimate organizers often get fields at a discount. But why do you think it's hard for us to get good field sites? It's because the field sites charge full price to soccer, and then they charge a discounted price to ultimate when they can't sell it to soccer. So fields have gotten way more expensive in the last 10 years. And on top of that, you know, you have just general cost inflation going on. And on top of that, people have not been paying themselves for the work. So like we have all of these issues that are exacerbated by the fact that people expect to pay the same price they paid when they started playing Ultimate, which is not a reasonable expectation. It's just not. Now, I do think, so to your question, amenities, what do I care about? Well, yes, field quality. I want lined fields at like big meaningful events. Tents on the sideline. Definitely water. Crystal clear communication. I think that's been another point of frustration. Very late schedules coming out this year. In some cases, I don't think teams heard about scheduling until Friday before sectionals. That's obviously not acceptable. And it's tough. I know it's tough because you're trying to wrangle all these events all over the place. You're basically asking for volunteers to like put these events on. And, you know, everybody wants the cost to be as low as possible, but then they also complain when things like amenities aren't there, which I get. Like this is the series, right? We should try to take it as seriously as possible and make it feel like it is important and counts. So anyway, I think I get it. You know, teams don't want to feel like they're getting screwed, but at the same time, I think some perspective on like what things actually cost and what is reasonable, right? People are like, whoa, this person's going to make, you know, X thousands of dollars from this event. Well, who exactly? Like if you're talking about an organization that, you know, runs other clinics and leagues and youth stuff in your area, why are you even complaining? Like they need that money.
I'm curious. We are not far away from another college conferences, and there are going to be 2 sets of them this college cycle. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of these same kind of issues. I think it's a little harder to justify increasing price for colleges, but maybe it's not. Maybe if colleges are getting all their money from the schools, then hey, let's take them for all they're worth. Maybe that should be a cash cow for us.
Keep in mind that one of the great things about that help keep costs down for college teams is that a lot of colleges are able to get fields and host their own sectionals events or regionals. And they often get those fields for free because there's students there. That obviously takes an enormous chunk out of the budget that you can then reduce fees appropriately. And look, it's all relative, right? An XY tournament in late September for a college team doesn't need to cost $50 a person. But, a club tournament with adult players who have been choosing to compete in this travel-based tournament setting, like paying, again, like seriously, think about it for a second, 40 instead of 20 per person. It's like, why do you even fight? Like, what? It costs more to buy your dinner than it does to play the tournament. Like, but that extra money makes an enormous difference to like the operations. And yes, absolutely, demand that you get amenities that match the price. So if it sucks, give that feedback. But if it doesn't suck, if it's run really well and it's expensive, then you should be like, wow, that was great. I'm happy to pay this money if I get this good experience. Okay. So, Keith, any other thoughts on sectionals this weekend?
Not from this past weekend. Again, hard to know what to make of it. I think that there was a chance for some teams that it was like, hey, let's put our foot on the gas and see how we really stack up so that we don't have to find out when our seasons are on the line. But I don't know how much of that actually played out. I think it's probably more likely that people were still in sectionals mode because people just fall back on what they know. I did have some curious thoughts about there was a lot of thoughts from the community about the Triple Crown Tour and like, oh, we don't get access to these elite level teams. Sometimes they skip sectionals. Well, sectionals is where you get that access. I hope that, I hope it felt valuable to both sides because I've already heard some club players talking about like, well, we barely did anything. We went out, elite club players who were like, well, we went out and crushed a bunch of teams and that was, fine, but it wasn't really productive for us. So just something to think about because it gets talked about all the time. And I feel like no one actually thinks about the implications of it. So,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely like everyone's on the same footing. But there's a reason, I think, that the elite teams have been exempted from sectionals in the last, 8 years or whatever it's been. If you do the things, you don't have to play sectionals because what's the point? Realistically, it's not that beneficial for those top teams. So still interesting. Still see some upsets. That's fun. We got a bunch more sectionals coming up this coming weekend. And then we head into regionals where obviously things get very interesting. Lots of preview content coming up on Deep Look in the coming weeks. Make sure to join us for our subscriber bonus segment where we talk about the AUDL Championship Weekend from a 10,000-foot view. Think about the future of what it could hold. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.